Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Gal Swisa Cohen. 3 years ago, my family and I moved to Long Island with a clear mission to serve as the living bridge between the people of Israel and the incredible community here. Out of this journey, I created The Israeli Bond, a podcast designed to tell the story of Israel and its people beyond the headlines. We are here for the authentic, the personal, and the direct stories that bring us close together. This podcast is a production of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, New York, and it is thanks to their vision and support that this content is brought to you today. So let's begin with my guest today, Michael Schlank. Hi, welcome.
Hi, Gal. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in here today. So Michael is the executive director at the Sid Jacobson JCC, having assumed leadership in November 2025. A Long Island native, he previously served as the CEO of NJY Camps, the largest residential Jewish summer camp network in North America, and has held a senior leadership roles both nonprofit and public policy sectors. Michael is an experienced speaker and writer on leadership, Jewish communal life, Israel, and American Jewry. His opinion and first-person pieces have appeared in outlets including The Jewish Standard, New Jersey Jewish News, and more. And his writing on Israel and Jewish peoplehood has also been published in 1840 and the Times of Israel blogs. He has been featured as a speaker on international panels, including as a presenter at the IDCT conference in Abu Dhabi, UAE, where he spoke among global leaders on communal engagement and Jewish identity. Michael holds a Master of Science in Education from Long Island University, an Advanced Certificate in Education Leadership from Stony Brook University, a Master's degree from Hofstra University, and a Bachelor degree from University of Albany. A very educated.
I mean, maybe. I certainly went to those schools.
Yeah, it was and a mix of schools.
A mix of schools, yes.
All the schools in Long Island, right?
No, Albany is upstate New York.
Yeah, but like
everything else. Yeah,
but you covered everything. In Long Island.
Oh yes, I wanted to make sure I went to school in every single part of the island. That was my mission, and I affected that mission well.
So great for you. And I want us to start. So I told you before that I was investigating a little bit and researching a little bit, and also from what I just read as your very brief bio, but also from looking at all these degrees, it looked to me that at least in the earliest stages of your career, you had traveled and zigzagged a little bit between a few disciplines. So even before my first question, this is like a before question. The before first question.
Yeah. Very Israeli. Before, yes.
Yeah, the before.
Yes.
So I want to understand, I want you to go back for a minute to young Michael, right before going to college. What did you want to do when you'll grow up?
Geez, that's a great question. And it's so easy to answer because it has nothing to do with what I did. So I was convinced I was going to do one of two things. Young Michael was going to either be the third baseman for the New York Yankees or a doctor. Clearly, neither one of those things happened.
Wow.
I arrived at SUNY Albany, and I took my first biology class and chemistry class. In biology, I did quite well. In chemistry, I did less than quite well. And after the second test, I called up my mom, and I said, remember, Mom, I was going to be the third baseman for the New York Yankees. I'm not going to be a doctor either. And that was it. It wasn't, the sciences for me were not going to be something that was going to be long-term. Now, looking back at it, maybe if I'd been a little bit more mature, I could have taken that class over again, maybe studied a little bit harder, but that was not to be. So the young Michael is not in the place where the old Michael is not in the place where the young Michael thought he might be.
But you haven't stopped in the first degree, right? You also did your master degree in health.
Administration. So I graduated in 1994 from college. I'm old, right? I'm very old. I graduated, and it was a difficult job market. And like many people, it was, what do you do? So I spent a year doing some work. I did some work out of St. John's, doing some cognitive testing of young people, but it was a job. It wasn't necessarily going to be a career. And I'd always been interested in public policy and healthcare. There's that doctor piece, right? I wasn't going to be a doctor. Maybe I would tell the doctors what to do. I don't know. So I did that. I did that degree, and that degree took me into the world of public policy and politics. So that was, there's a connection. It might be tenuous, but it's a connection that I was always kind of interested in healthcare and medicine, and so that first degree ended up with me working in public policy and politics for some period of time.
Okay, so
makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, it makes a sense.
Now it makes sense. Looking back, my parents were probably horrified, but yeah, it makes somewhat sense. Yeah.
But then, okay, so now I want to take you to the first question.
Go ahead.
Okay?
Yeah, first question.
So then, as you said, you went to public policy.
Yep.
Basically, you worked at New York City, and then, and after 9/11, you got a very meaningful job as the high-level coordinator between NYPD and FDNY, right?
So let's not overplay that so much. So here's what happened. So I left. So I spent some time working in public policy and a not-for-profit organization, a think tank, and then I ended up working for a member of the Assembly, New York State Assembly. And while I was there, I also did a whole bunch of congressional races and judicial races. I worked in presidential. I did a whole bunch of different things. But on 9/11, I was working for, at that time, Assemblyman Jeff Klein. And we ended up, I was working for the Assemblyman, but I had taken a leave at some level, and I was working on a mayoral race. So Alan Hevesy at that time was running for mayor. He was the controller of the city of New York, and he was running for mayor. And so we had become very close with members of the FDNY, the fire department for New York City, because of that campaign. 9/11 happened. That day I was I was organizing along with some colleagues, one of the boroughs, the Bronx, for that mayoral campaign. And very early on, it became clear that what had happened, that's a much longer story, a whole nother podcast. But once 9/11 had happened and the election was called off, or it wasn't called off, it was postponed. We spent any number of months working very closely with the FDNY. We raised funds, we brought clothing, and I would go down to what they called the pile at the time, or ground zero. In the beginning, we were going down regularly. I actually was there 18 hours after the first plane hit the towers. So I was there, mamash, as we say, in the real, I have unbelievable stories and sort of memories of that. And then for the next several months, I forget exactly how many, 6 or 8 months, we spent a long time helping with the recovery effort, not down there. Those folks were heroes. All we really did was sort of coordinate some relief efforts around clothing and dollars, and we worked closely with the with some of the unions in the fire department.
So it's even so now. My question is even more like, I'm even more curious to understand. So this role was not only, it was very meaningful in terms of values, like you were really
Sure.
helping community in this.
I felt like it, sure, yeah.
And also, as someone that maybe wanted to do something in public policy, this was a very good starting point to start a very good career in this realm.
So yes, it was. So I'd been working with the Assembly member for some period of time, and for all of us who lived in America and who were of a certain age who were working during that period of time, it was a seminal moment for us. And so being able to be a very, very small part. I mean, I remember driving down the West Side Highway on the day after 9/11, so that was 9/12, and I was in a police car, and behind us was a van we had collected clothing for the fire department, because we called our contacts, what do you need? And they said, we need sweatshirts and socks, because they were there at that point for 24, 26 hours. So we went around and collected that, and were able to bring a large amount of clothing to that time Chelsea Piers. And as we were driving down the West Side Highway, people were standing. You remember, you can look at these on YouTube now, handing out water and cheering and food, and we were just sort of escorting people. People were going down to work in the pile, and there was the National Guard there. So it was a really being in the moment in history was unbelievable. And from that time, we actually we dropped off the clothing, spent some time, and then we drove down. It was kind of the Wild West. There wasn't a lot of organization. We drove all the way down to the pile, to ground zero. There was still ash falling, fires burning. I have a vivid memory of a plane engine in one of the scaffolds, or a piece of maybe not an engine, a piece of a plane. Someone coming and telling us, knocking on the police cruiser that we were with, and saying, "Hey, do you see that? Can you please tell somebody about this?" It was a real, very surreal experience. And then watching how the world unfolded and politics injected in itself. I won't tell you who said this because I want to not embarrass the individual, but I was in Albany very shortly after 9/11, maybe 2 weeks after, and there was an election still going on, and someone turned to a group of us and said, "So how is this going to affect my election?" So I got to watch both the amazing parts of people coming together, much like we did after October 7th, and much like after October 7th, politics still continued to play a role. There are actually a lot of analogies that I can see between the two of those events.
I would want to tap into it later on.
Sure.
But that leads me, you probably understand like where I'm going.
I don't, I'm so curious actually.
So, and right in this moment, you tell yourself, okay, I'm done. And you're going and starting being, how do you call it? Like a middle school teacher.
So it wasn't at that moment, but it was pretty close thereafter, right? So I spent some time. I finished that. That election finished. Controller Hevesy lost the mayoral race, and I spent some time very shortly thereafter. That same controller ran for the control of the state of New York, and I continued my work with the assembly, but then also did some campaign work, worked on that campaign, and he was successful. Controller Hevesy was successful, and I went to work for his administration and intergovernmental affairs. And I did that for about 6 or 8 months, and that's when I did say enough's enough. There were a whole bunch of things happened. My wife was pregnant with our first son. I started to think about what was going to happen for the rest of my life, or at least part of the rest of my life. And there was some crossroads there. Was I going to do this for the rest of my life? Was I going to become a lobbyist? What did I really want to do? Came from a family of teachers, grew up in camp. Schools always felt like a really natural place for me. When I would, lots of events you have in school when you're doing this kind of work. And I did kind of one day showed up, came home and said to my wife, like, I think I'm done here and this is what I want to do. And to my surprise, she's always been a super supporter of me, but it was a really radical change from what I had been doing. She said, sure, that makes a lot of sense. And that was it. Folks who I work with, and they were kind of blown away. But if we remember at that period of time, there were lots of life changes people were making. Lots of people went to the military. People did all sorts of things. I think, again, like October 7th, like COVID, it provided an opportunity for people to think differently about their lives. So I did that, and it was an amazing experience. It was challenging. I actually had my first graduate school class. The professors went on strike. And so my son was born in October. I started graduate school what I thought was September, but the professors went on strike. So there was no school until 8 days after my son was born. So that night I went to my first graduate school class. We were sitting in a small room of my second degree, going back to become a middle school teacher. And we went around and introduced ourselves, and what I think the professor said, actually, what's interesting happened the last day. And I said, well, my son just had his bris that night. So yeah, so it was a 9/11 certainly was a seminal moment in our lives, and I think it probably was part of the impetus for me to think about what I wanted to do, and was that what I wanted to do. And part of it goes back to the story that I told about the politics piece, right? Someone asking in that moment, how is this going to affect my election, is both real and something I felt like I had moved on from, and I wanted to move on to a different environment.
So what was the value that did you felt that you want to go?
Yeah, it's a good question. I came from a family of service. I came from a family, my parents were teachers. My grandfathers ended up teaching at some point. My grandmother worked for a member of Congress. My grandmother worked in the provost office at LIU in Brooklyn. So I came from a family of educators, and so that was, I think, the value of education, the value of giving back, was something that was sort of ingrained in me, whether I liked it or not. It was kind of part of my DNA, and I think that's how I ended up in the classroom.
Okay, so you said you taught middle
school, right? So middle school. So I taught sixth grade. So in America, the school systems are they're different. Not every school systems, all school systems are different. They're not run from the national level. They're ran very locally. So middle school is often vernacularly called from like 5th to 8th grade. So I taught 6th grade, which would be considered middle school.
Okay, and what exactly did you taught?
So I taught, when I started teaching, I taught everything because I was new, and I took whatever job I could get. But ultimately, really, I was a social studies and English teacher. I did that for many years. And an interesting fact was, so my dad was a teacher as well. I ended up teaching in the same school building, the same subjects as my father did for the time I taught. In fact, on the wall, it said Mr. Schlank. Because it's room 211, I think I taught in, I'm pretty sure. And a couple of years into my teaching, a young person came, and actually someone in their 20s came into my room and looked at me and said, Mr. Schlank, I know you're looking for my dad. He retired a couple of years ago.
Wow.
But it was the same building. In fact, many of his colleagues ended up being my colleagues.
Wow, this is such
It was so interesting.
Yeah, and such a great loop, like
yes,
loop.
a small circle. Yes.
Yeah, and then another shift in the career.
Yeah, I know. It drove my parents crazy, I guess. So I taught for 7 or so years, and while I was teaching, the first thing I did was teachers in America, like Israel, don't necessarily make enough money. Certainly at the outset, I had a new baby and a house, and I needed to make a little bit more money. And I'd grown up in camp, so I called a friend of mine and said, "Well, I'm back in teaching, or I'm teaching. What do I do for the summertime?" And growing up in camp, I met my wife in summer camp, so it was something that was part of who I was. And so naturally, I ended up working in camp, and I ended up being hired by this organization called Oasis Children's Services. At the time, it was a startup. It was a for-profit organization, but worked in both what one would consider the not-for-profit and for-profit spaces. Part of our business was in regular day camps. We found underutilized spaces and ran for-profit day camps, and part of it was providing educational services in communities that were underserved. And those would be contracts. The district would get money from the federal government, and they would hire us. So it sort of combined both my experiences in government, in education, in camping, all of those things. I did that part-time while I taught for like 7 years. I was a camp director, and then I became a regional director, overseeing a whole bunch of camps. It was a big organization. At one point, we probably had 25 or 26 programs, multiple states.
Oh, it's not only New York?
No. We were here in Long Island. We were in New York City. We were in Massachusetts. We were in New Jersey, upstate Westchester.
And you were in the headquarters of this organization.
Yeah, so at first, I ran one small camp right here in Hicksville. And then I ran a camp in Queens. And then I ran a camp here in Long Island and in Roslyn. And then I became a regional director overseeing a whole bunch of camps. And that was all still while I was working as a teacher. And then at some point, about 7 years into me doing this, the owner of the company came to me and said, "Would you be interested in doing this full time?" And so I said to him, "It'd be interesting for me." I had finished my degree in educational leadership, and I was thinking about my next step in the classroom. Maybe it would be in administration. I said, "Give me a year to think about it. School year, right? We'll continue to work together, and at the end of the year, let's see what that looks like." So at the end of the year, it was 2008, 2009. There was a big recession here. Teaching was becoming difficult. There were people becoming late. There were teachers who I started who were losing their jobs even though they'd taught 8 or 9 years. So it became less stable necessarily. And so I took a leave of absence for a year, and I became the executive vice president of Oasis Children's Services for that year. And about 8 or 9 months into it, he sat me down and said, "So what do you think?" And I said, I think this makes a lot of sense for me to stay here. And I wrote a letter of resignation, which was hard because I'd got a graduate degree, but it made sense for my family financially and for a whole bunch of other reasons. So I was with Oasis for a long time, for a very, very long time.
No, actually, when you tell the story like that, it makes a lot more sense because up until now, it looked like you're like
jumping around. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it was.
but-
So there's a through line of sort of both service and education, and also increasing experience and responsibility. While I was teaching, I did a lot of mentoring of new teachers. I worked on some grant programs through the federal government. So there are some through lines there for sure.
Okay, so yeah, for sure. And what leads me to not a really like that was not really a change in career. So basically, it was actually
an extension of what I did,
Yeah,
correct.
a next step in your career.
That's right.
Is when you get the offer from NJY Camps to become the CEO of this organization.
Sure.
But it wasn't like just another offer, but it was an offer to step into this organization in a very big crisis moment.
Correct.
That you needed to gain trust both of the employees, and also it was 2020, so first year. Can
That's
you
correct.
tell a little bit
Sure,
about
I'll
this
talk about it.
experience?
So I'd been with Oasis for a really long time, and there was an inflection point in the business, and was I going to stay or not stay, and about ownership, and so I came. The CEO at the time, I was a very small minority partner. He was the majority partner. Said to me, we had a conversation and about the future and what was going to happen, and so it was a little bit in flux. And I was recruited actually what happened to be the full story was when those conversations started to happen and I realized I wasn't going to buy the business right away. It might have been a little bit time. I made a phone call to the CEO of Foundation for Jewish Camping, FJC, which is the largest foundation for Jewish camping in the world, Jeremy Fingerman, and I got on a call with him, which was supposed to be about 4 or 5 minutes. Hey, Jeremy, I'm a Jewish guy who's in camping. How do I help? What can I do for in the Jewish world? I'd been involved in Jewish communal life as a volunteer previously. That 5-minute conversation turned into more of a half an hour conversation with him saying, there's this big job that's open. There's a recruiter that's working on it. I'd like to forward your resume to it. And I really said to him, I'm not interested. I'm kind of still this thing Oasis. We're figuring this out. He said, would you speak to them? I said, sure, I'll speak to anybody. Spoke to the recruiter, someone I actually ended up knowing. And I said to her, I'm not sure if I'm really interested. This was March 6th or 7th. I'm sorry, the initial conversation was in January, February. We had a meeting set in the city to meet with the board. I thought maybe I'd meet with the board and give them my sense of what the next CEO might look like. I wasn't really looking for the job. And that was the day COVID struck New York City, literally the day. And so I got a call and she said, everyone's not so comfortable with coming to the city now. Maybe we'll do it by Zoom. So easy enough. So I had a whole series of Zoom conversations. So I didn't have to really be fully in on this interview process because I was doing it by Zoom. And COVID messed the whole world up anyway, so people were thinking differently. And then they offered me the job, which was a little bit of a surprise to me because the whole time I think there was part of me that was pretending that I wasn't really interviewing, and I was trying to work to save this Oasis business, trying to figure out what the world was like. I had my daughter and my son not in school. There were all these complicated things. And I would go down to the basement every once in a while and have these meetings. And I sort of compartmentalized that. And then it became really real in about May or June when they offered me the job. So
you've been given the job, but actually it's on the summer that the first summer.
So the summer, the job is offered to me. There's no camp. The organization is closed. It's a very big organization. It's a $23 million organization. The organization is closed. It's COVID. We don't know what's going to happen in the world. The vaccine isn't out yet. And on top of this organization has gone through some really serious and very public turmoil. The previous exec had been, this is not my characterization, it's just the facts, had been forced to resign under really difficult circumstances, both financial and personal mismanagement. And I took over the organization in a real turnaround. It was ostensibly bankrupt. Lots of organizations were, and COVID. And there we were, 2020, and here we were, and we were off to the races.
So it sounds like you just jumped jumped head into the ground?
I jumped right head first into what was a really challenging experience.
So I'm trying to understand, like, what sorts of skills, what experience from your past you felt that you've equipped with in order to face this challenge, and how did you knew that you're gonna lift this organization up? Spoiler, you did, but how you knew it was, and COVID, it was such no one knew anything.
Yeah, so I think COVID, part of the reason was, I remember talking to my wife and she said, like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, it just won't work out. It's already in trouble. We're like, the whole world was in trouble, so give it a shot. I don't know if I fully appreciated how challenging this would be. I did not show up and say, oh, I'm so smart or I am so good. That wasn't my approach. My approach was, I have a bunch of experiences. Oasis was a complicated organization. I have a bunch of other experiences in my life. Politics was the best graduate school I went to. I went to a lot of graduate school, but in the work I did, the first meeting was with a rental car company, and the next meeting was with a healthcare company, and the next meeting was with a person who needed to get a visa to leave America, and the next meeting was with a bunch of executives from a healthcare from the hospital that we did a lot of healthcare stuff, and the next meeting was with the superintendent.
Your master degree really helped.
It was, and the next meeting was with community groups. So I learned to learn quickly. Is what I did. I learned to learn quickly, and so I took a shot, and I thought, I don't know who can do this job. It seems pretty hard, but maybe I can. And Jewish camping was something really important to me. It was important to my family. It was important to my children. It was important to my extended family. And so it was an honor, a privilege. It was super humbling. I did not go in thinking that I was going to be able to save the organization. That's how I thought about it. I would use this analogy often. You eat an elephant. How do you eat an elephant? Piece by piece. So my goal just was to do the best I could, stabilize it, and see where we went. And I do think there was a lot of sort of anything was possible during COVID. And I think we forget what we thought about like that. People started businesses and did all sorts of things that now seem sort of insane. So when you say that, it sounds crazy that I did this. But I did. And it worked out at some level.
Okay, so thank you for that. We're going to end this part of our conversation now, and we're going to return to another episode right after this one. So for you who is with us, please stay tuned to our next episode with Michael, where we're going to talk a little bit more about your experience in NYJ and go a little bit more deeper into the fun stuff.
Great. Thanks, you guys.
Okay. Thank you so much for being with us today. And until next time, take care and be well.